Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. Wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. It's getting into October, so I like to change things up a little bit. Talk a little bit more about the supernatural, the spooky stuff, the things they don't want you to know. This is actually a topic I don't like looking into very much, but spontaneous human combustion. It's actually a very interesting phenomenon, and it goes back as far back as the 1600s. There were reports of it. Now, that first report is a very interesting one because it kind of sets the benchmark for everything that we have seen since. Now, the report claims that a woman spontaneously caught fire, but specifically notes that this particular woman had not eaten in 3 years and had lived every single day off of drinking nothing but brandy, or as it calls it, clarified wine. So very early on, the association between alcoholism and spontaneous human combustion comes about. This is repeated in the 1700s when in Cesena, Italy, they have another case of this. And again, it's reported this person is a heavy drinker. Now, being the people that they were, they start assuming that people became flammable after drinking. In the modern day, we know this is not true. Charles Dickens actually wrote one of his books with a case of spontaneous human combustion in it. And for that, he was taken to task by many of his readers, saying such a thing was impossible. And he noted that he had attended a case 20 years before, and that exact situation had happened. Now, this is where you start to put the pieces together. Does anybody in my listening audience honestly think that you can drink nothing but brandy for 3 years and survive in any meaningful way? Beer has at least some nutritional value. It's been called liquid bread. Wine, maybe on an extremely strict diet, but from the very first case, this idea that this fearsome woman who was drinking nothing but brandy her whole life was consumed by the fires of hell is something that's stuck in the mentality of the world. And yes, the idea of flames erupting from within, that's the demon coming to corrupt you, erupting literally from your soul and disposing of your mortal remains. Make no mistake, this was as much as a morality tale as it was an example of what happened. Fake news is not an invention of the 21st century. It's been going on forever. And since they're able to paint these people, these cases of spontaneous human combustions, as immoral people, then logically, the next step was drinking must be immoral. Charles Dickens lived in the 1800s. It also came of importance in the 1800s, the temperance movement. So, you have a very influential author whose works are all over the place, and he is telling people, oh yes, spontaneous human combustion has something to do with alcohol. The temperance movement took it under their own hat, so they wanted to get rid of all alcohol. So here they have somebody whose stories are being published nationwide in newspapers, and a fairly high level of education across the nation meant that a lot of people were reading these stories. This meant that the temperance movement was able to piggyback off of that and have the idea planted in people's heads. The idea that somehow people who drink a lot were going to burn in hell. And this is why in the 1920s the Prohibitionist Act was passed. The Prohibitionists basically declared in the United States that nobody would be allowed to drink liquor. Of course, if you got a doctor's note, you could do it. It's kind of like medical marijuana in the modern day. But you see how a small idea written down as an anecdote gets a few more picked up, and eventually you have a whole movement based around it, a political movement. Now in the 1930s, that was all rolled back, but for a little bit, it was a constitutional amendment in the United States. These people had so much power and so much influence they corrupted the narrative so much so as to get an amendment to the Constitution passed. This very amendment was the exact thing that helped Al Pacino and, sorry, not Al Pacino, oh my God, Al Capone and gangsters like that rise to power because they were able to smuggle the booze across and make money. As a matter of fact, a few World War I submarines were pressed into service, and they were taking across booze from Canada to the United States. There was supposedly a pipeline buried under the rivers and the lakes. And that's how much money was available, that they were able to buy surplus military equipment just solely so that they could move the booze and make the money. Because ultimately, as I've said before, you're never going to get rid of that 10 to 20%. Those people who are determined to have their alcohol, determined to have their smoke, determined to have their crack, etc. What makes it different is booze and meth and cocaine tend to make you act differently in public. So people can look at you and say, oh, that's a meth head, that's a crackhead, that's a drunk, whatever it is. And that's what people really were reacting against, was this stereotype of what a drunk person looks and acts like. And indeed, in the modern day, there are still many countries that outlaw alcohol. But I'll bet you cash, every single one of them has something like a speakeasy. I'm going to pick on Saudi Arabia, where outside of the bases and the U.S. labor enclaves, it's dry county. There's no liquor allowed anywhere. But I'll bet you cash, a few of those Saudi princes have an impressive liquor collection. It's nicely hidden. And indeed, there's plenty of Saudi princes and maybe even the king himself who are virtuous people and they adhere to the tenets of their religion and they honestly mean well. But I'm sure if they want it, a snifter of a brandy is available to them. And it isn't the brandy you and I get, it's whatever the top quality brandy might be. So ultimately, you have a small little fairy tale being inflated to such an extent that it influences popular opinion, not only here, but around the world. Even to this day, we still have multiple laws involving drinking. You can't give beer to a 5-year-old, even though in times past they would give light beer to 5-year-olds. Right now it's considered just gauche and harmful to the child. You can't give beer to somebody in the hospital because it's considered bad for them. Even if they're only in there for, something minor, you're considered to be the one affecting their health. And all this from a simple myth that spread around mouth to mouth, word to word. It was written down, but you don't really get real widespread readership until the 1800s when Charles Dickens picked up on it and passed it on to the Prohibitionists. This is important to remember because the little stories that we tell to ourselves today can wind up in massive political movements tomorrow. And we have so many narratives out there today. Is the 45th president the best president in the world or the worst that ever was? Most people can agree that Nixon did some bad things, although the severity of what he was doing can be questioned. And most importantly, the standard narrative that we have where poor people are lazy, disabled people don't want to get jobs, is the worst narrative of all. Because there are people out there that are making public policy that are influenced by that. And that's the narrative they're teaching to themselves. So, when we look at spontaneous human combustion, it's important to remember that every idea has a genesis. Everything comes from a seed. What seeds are growing in our heads that will affect us 200, 300, even 400 years from now? Especially in the age of the internet, when a meme can take over and absolutely blow everything else out of the water, it's important to remember the little things we say and do, the friend of a friend, the funny thing, the quote from Winston Churchill about the internet. The internet was not even a thought when Winston Churchill was around, but people spread it all the time. So take care of what you do. As far as spontaneous human combustion goes, officially, I don't know. Personally, it scares the hell out of me Not because I'm a drunk person, but not because I'm a drunk, but just simply because there's so much about the human body we don't know. With that, we hope you enjoyed the show today. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and we hope you have a fantastic day.